everyone. Here we're going to be covering the vertebral column, more specifically the common features that all the different types of vertebrae have. The vertebral column, which can also be called the spine or even the backbone or the spinal column, will form this inner cavity that will house the spinal cord and protect it. Not only that, but it also supports the head and it will serve as a point of attachment for the ribs, the pelvic girdle, and muscles of the back and upper limbs. The vertebral column is made up of a series of bones that's called the vertebrae. So if it has an E at the end, it's plural. Without the E, is singular. That will form this very strong and flexible column. This column will be able to move forward, backwards, sideways, and even rotate, even though they're all connected to each other. Now, these vertebrae that form the spinal column, they're going to be divided into groups according to where they are going to be located. During the early development, the total number of vertebrae is going to be 33. Then several vertebrae in the sacral and coccygeal regions, they will fuse. And as a result of this fusion, the adult vertebral column typically contains about 26 vertebrae, which makes up about 2/5 of the total height of the body. Now these are going to be distributed as follows. There are going to be 7 cervical vertebrae, which are the ones that are located in the neck region, 12 thoracic vertebrae, which are the ones that are located posterior to the thoracic cavity, where your heart and your lungs are going to be located, 5 lumbar vertebrae, which are the ones that are going to be supporting the lower back, 1 sacrum, that will be formed by 5 fused sacral vertebrae, and at the end, 1 coccyx that will consist of 3 to 5 fused coccygeal vertebrae. The cervical, the thoracic, and the lumbar vertebrae are movable, but the sacrum and the coccyx are not. And we will discuss these regions in detail shortly. The way that I remember how many vertebrae are present in each of the subdivisions is the hours that usually an elderly might have their meals. So for example, there are 7 cervical vertebrae. That means that a person will have their breakfast at 7 a.m. There are 12 thoracic vertebrae, meaning that lunch will be at 12 p.m. 5 lumbar vertebrae, meaning that the person will have dinner at 5 p.m. That's why I say elderly, because we usually don't have our dinner this early, right? And then the others are going to be fused. The sacrum will be fused, so it's only 1 after it's fused, and the coccyx will also be fused. Even though vertebrae in different regions of the spinal column, they will vary in size, shape, and bone features, they are similar enough that we can discuss the structures and some of the functions of a typical vertebrae. Some of the bone features that are more noticeable are, for example, the body, which is this structure right over here, which can also be called the centrum. We also have the spinous process right over here. Then we have another process that's called the transverse process, one on each side. In the middle, we have an opening that will pass the spinal cord, which is right over here. And this opening, when we talk about one vertebrae, it's going to be called the vertebral foramen. Now, all the vertebral foramen, they will come together and form what we call the vertebral canal. Another bone feature is the superior articular facet, which are these structures over here. If you have a superior articular facet, you're going to have an inferior articular facet, which is located right underneath. Now, because all vertebrae will articulate with each other, all of them will have a superior articular facet and an inferior articular facet. Now, how do they articulate? The inferior articular facet of the vertebrae on top will articulate with the superior articular facet of the vertebrae underneath. And in this way, they will stack on one another. Of these bone features that we talked about, the only ones that will appear in all vertebrae are the transverse process, the vertebral foramen, and the articular facets, either the superior or inferior articular facets. The body is not present in all of them, and neither is the spinous process. And we will talk about this when we talk about the specific types of vertebrae. Now, the vertebral body or centrum is going to be the largest portion of the vertebrae, as we can see, and it will be located anteriorly. All the adjacent vertebral bodies are going to be lined up in a row that will create this column-like axis of the skeleton. And these vertebral bodies, they will serve as this main weight-bearing component of the vertebral column. And the spinous process and the transverse processes, they will serve for muscle attachments. The spinous process is located posteriorly, and if you pass your fingers down the midline of your vertebral column, you will feel the spinous process going down. From the second cervical vertebrae all the way down to the sacrum, these structures that are called intervertebral discs, where inter means between, are going to be found between the bodies of the adjacent vertebrae, as we can see over here. They account for about 25% of the height of the vertebral column, and each disc is going to have this outer fibrous ring that's going to be consisting of fibrocartilage that's called the annulus fibrosus, where annulus means ring-like structure. So it is a structure that goes around in a circle. And an inner watery mucoid soft substance that's called the nucleus pulposus, where pulposus means pulp-like. With the increasing age, this watery mucoid region is going to convert to this fibrocartilage as it gradually becomes less hydrated. And the discs will form this strong joint that will permit various movements of the vertebral column, and it will also be very important to absorb the vertical shock. Now, during the course of the day, the interesting thing is that these discs, they will compress and they lose some water from their cartilaginous matrix, so that we are a bit shorter at night than we are when we wake up in the morning. And then while we sleep, there is less compression, and the nucleus pulposus will be able to rehydrate so that we are a little bit taller when we wake up in the morning. And as we age, we do become shorter, but there are recent studies that show that the decrease in the vertebral height with age is a result from a loss of bone mass in the vertebral bodies and not due to a decrease in the thickness of the intervertebral discs. Since these intervertebral discs, they are avascular, meaning that they don't have blood vessels, this annulus fibrosus and the nucleus pulposus, they're going to rely on the blood vessels from the bodies of the vertebrae to obtain their oxygen and nutrients, and also to remove their waste products. In stretching exercises such as yoga, they are able to decompress the disc and also increase the general blood circulation, both of which will speed up the uptake of oxygen and nutrients by the discs and the removal of wastes. Therefore, if you didn't have a good reason to do yoga, there is your reason: to create healthy intervertebral discs. Besides this, the intervertebral discs are also important because they will increase the space between one vertebrae and the other to allow for the spinal nerves to pass through them. And this opening between two vertebrae is called the intervertebral foramen. So foramen is a hole between vertebrae, intervertebral. Now, I don't consider this a bone feature because it's a feature that you need two vertebrae to be able to form this bone feature. Therefore, it's a common feature, but it's not one bone feature.